I was able to jump around from room to room during both of our breakout sessions and heard just incredible conversation taking place. So we have remarks from a few more speakers from the administration today, but we are also going to share whole group some of the action items that came out of our breakout session. So I'm extraordinarily excited for that. Our next speaker, Vanita Gupta, has served as the head of the Civil Rights Division at the United States Department of Justice since October of 2014. As the Chief Civil Rights Prosecutor for the United States, Ms. Gupta oversees a wide range of criminal and civil enforcement efforts to ensure equal justice and protect equal opportunity for all. Under her leadership, the division continues its critical work in a number of areas, including ensuring that policies and practices around school discipline and school climate comply with federal law in order to support all students around the country. It's a privilege to welcome her here to stage, Assistant Attorney General Vanita Gupta.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I heard that it's been a pretty powerful day, and I want to thank you, Kalisha, for the introduction and for the welcome. I also want to just start by thanking my outstanding colleagues here today, including from the White House Council on Women and Girls and my team from the Civil Rights Division, from the Educational Opportunities section and the Special Litigation section. These two sections at the division work day in and day out tirelessly to protect the rights of all children so that they can be in safe and secure and productive and constructive learning environments and successful schools. And I'm glad that so many of them were able to help facilitate a number of the breakouts today as well, because it really inures to the benefit of our work. I also want to acknowledge, I know that Secretary John King is going to be speaking here shortly before all of you, and his extraordinary leadership really motivates all of us to work harder to ensure that our schools are serving all of our country's children. I also want to thank all of you as policymakers and researchers and advocates for your steadfast commitment to supporting girls of color and to protecting the rights of all children in our schools. Really throughout American society, from our schools to our communities to the juvenile justice systems, we can see how trauma can really inflict a devastating impact on young women. Whether that's due to bullying or sexual assault or discriminatory discipline, really the trauma of injustices and indignities can reverberate for years. And I'm sure that today's series of conversations have really focused on the devastating impact. Trauma can invade nearly every area of a girl's life. It impacts family relationships, it interferes with schoolwork and academic performance, it carries into one's social life, even at awkward stages of adolescence aren't bad enough, it makes everything all the more difficult. And there's no question that it can leave an emotional and psychological toll that may not be the most visible harm, but that can linger painfully for years. And I want to thank the young women who spoke here earlier today about these experiences and about the importance of the work that we're all committed to doing. A trauma-informed approach to addressing sexual harassment and school discipline and violence means really developing strategies that are centered around caring for children with compassion, with support, and with dignity. And it means addressing the root causes of traumatic events, for example, by preventing sexual assault and eradicating hostile learning environments. It also means, though, recognizing how to sensitively and effectively support students who have experienced serious trauma and integrating a trauma-informed approach into our collective response. And in the Civil Rights Division, we are advancing that mission to create safe, supportive, and inclusive schools across the system. A core part of this work is combating discriminatory discipline and policing practices that too often fail to recognize or address behavior that is trauma-driven. That lapse can fuel a pipeline to prison, where children in particular, of course, children of color and children with disabilities who've already suffered the harm of trauma at school or at home, ending up getting a sentence of incarceration rather than a diploma. We have a matter, it's very active in Meridian, Mississippi, where among a host of due process violations, we found students suspended from school and some later incarcerated in a juvenile detention facility for behavior as mundane as violating the dress code by wearing the wrong color socks or leaving their shirts untucked. And these actions disproportionately impacted children of color and children with disabilities. In 2013, we reached an agreement to address discriminatory school discipline practices, including referrals to law enforcement by the Meridian Public School District. And under the consent decree, the school system agreed to provide all students, including girls of color, with positive behavior interventions and supports before removing them from school. It also agreed to establish clear guidelines for the limited circumstances that require law enforcement intervention. And it agreed to ensure discipline measures are fair, equitable, and consistent, based largely on some very troubling facts that we found in the district. And last year, the court approved other agreements with the Meridian Police Department and the State Youth Probation Agency. The police and youth probation agreements similarly seek to avoid law enforcement involvement in alleged school-based misconduct whenever possible. And this Meridian agreement was really important because it allowed us to kind of do work across the spectrum of systems that have impact on kids' lives, not just in school, but also in the juvenile justice system and in the probation systems and beyond. And when youth encounter the juvenile justice system, the Meridian agreements really work to ensure that their civil rights are respected. And so together, our agreements in Mississippi focus on appropriate responses and resolutions rather than escalations of school-based incidents. We're also advancing these systemic reforms around the country, including in Palm Beach County, Florida, the nation's 11th largest school district. A settlement agreement that we reached there required the district to remove language barriers to students and prevent police involvement in routine disciplinary matters. And we're enforcing other agreements elsewhere as well, from Tucson, Arizona to St. Martin Parish, Louisiana. We're also working to combat the scourge of sexual assault and harassment that threatens the security of our schools, as well as the foundation of a free, open, and safe society. And in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where we reached a settlement to address allegations of sexual harassment in public schools, we found multiple cases of security guards harassing female students with inappropriate sexual comments and touching. And one security guard even tried to exchange inappropriate sexual contact for a promise not to report the girl's disciplinary violation. As a result, we required the school district to intervene promptly and effectively with strict guidelines and robust training for security guards. And the agreement also mandates that the school demonstrate a firm commitment to investigate any complaint of abuse or unlawful conduct. But beyond the K-12 context, we're also working to address sexual assault at colleges and universities. And for example, we've crafted impactful settlement agreements with state and local jurisdictions in Missoula, Montana, where we work to promote a victim-centered, trauma-informed approach to sexual assault and domestic violence. And to help law enforcement around the country advance this same approach, late last year we released a guidance on gender-biased policing. And the principles in our guidance include using trauma-informed interview tactics that encourage victim participation, replacing prejudiced statements that assume what happened with neutral, open-ended questions that are focused on learning what actually occurred. The principles also advise police officers to adopt a victim-centered approach that addresses the medical and emotional and safety needs of victims, including referrals to appropriate services. And in the juvenile justice system as well, we're working to protect the rights of all youth to be free from violence and abuse. In 2007, a Justice Department investigation uncovered juvenile correctional institutions in Ohio falling painfully short of their legal responsibilities to support the safety and health and educational needs of detained children. And it was in particular a youth correctional facility in the city of Delaware, Ohio, where they were holding youth in seclusion for actions as mundane as refusing breakfast and cursing and talking in class. And in one instance, a youth endured 14 hours in seclusion for arguing and using a racial slur. And state experts also concluded that Marion, Ohio, the correctional facility in Marion, Ohio, their mental health care system was failing to meet minimally acceptable constitutional requirements. These alarming and ineffective and frequently unconstitutional practices demand widespread reform. And over the past decade, we've responded with comprehensive approaches. After years of thorough investigation and effective litigation and independent monitoring, we agreed to terminate our consent decree with the state last year after it successfully implemented transformative reforms to their juvenile justice correctional facilities. And these reforms spanned a whole bunch of different areas, including eliminating the use of solitary confinement for punishment and ensuring individualized mental health care and dramatically reducing the population of youth in the facility to begin with. At the Civil Rights Division, I think we're really excited about this convening. And, the reality is we're continuously seeking to improve the ways that we incorporate trauma-informed practices into our settlement agreements and into the work that we're doing around the country. And as we assess the disparities and discriminatory practices that too often inflict trauma on our children, especially children of color, and leave them with a disadvantaged future, we need to continue responding with urgency and with action. Because the reality, and all of you know this, is that if we don't address the harm and if we don't deal with the trauma and if we don't really respond and understand the pain that young people experience in school, where do we honestly expect them to end up later on in their lives? How do we expect them to succeed when the deck is so stacked against them and the system offers so little support to help? And these questions are not just rhetorical questions that I'm asking here today. These are real questions and these are urgent questions. And they are essential, really, to building the future that all of our children deserve, a future of fairness and of safety and of inclusivity. And so, look, I know we all have a lot of work to do ahead, but I'm really glad to be here today to talk with all of you about the tough issues and to know that we're working together on the path forward. And so I just want to thank you all for your commitment to justice. So thank you.
And so I know that there are commitments that states are going to share, but we also have some external commitments that are being made today to this work. So I just want to invite to stage Rebecca Epstein again, who will invite to stage two others who are making tangible commitments out of this work today.
The Georgetown Law Center on Poverty is going to build on the momentum of this conference by pivoting from its role as a co-host to serving school system reformers who seek to implement trauma-informed approaches that are responsive to the unique needs of girls of color. So we're going to be inviting state teams that are here today and others who want to participate to provide more in-depth information about their needs in creating trauma-informed schools, with the ultimate goal of the Center on Poverty serving as a central convener of these groups. So we're proud to make that announcement today, and you can look forward to hearing from me in the upcoming weeks. Allison Brown, are you here? The Executive Director of Communities for Just Schools Funds, Allison Brown, has an announcement now. And Elizabeth Pruitt, if you want to come on up as well.
Good afternoon. Hi. I am so excited to announce today that the Communities for Just Schools Fund is launching a new fellowship program. The Education Anew Fellowship will be a 12 to 18-month fellowship and will be housed at the Southern Education Foundation based in Atlanta, Georgia. The Education Anew Fellow will work closely with the Communities for Just Schools Fund staff and grantee partners to develop a best practices institute that will be for educators from a youth and community-centered perspective to support the implementation of alternatives to exclusionary school discipline and the creation of healthy school climates. Our intent is to eliminate inequity in schools and nurture holistically healthy learning environments. The Education Anew Fellow will work closely with the Southern Education Foundation's soon-to-be-launched Racial Equity Leadership Network for School District Superintendents. So, within a frame of racial equity, the Education Anew Fellow will represent youth and community members to identify, shape, and help implement best practices that also are gender-aware and gender-specific, including trauma-informed practices. The Education Anew Fellow will foster conversations and collaborations between the organizers that the Communities for Just Schools Fund supports and the educators with whom the Southern Education Foundation works, all for the greater benefit of education, justice advocates, and school discipline reform efforts nationwide. We will soon be accepting applications, and we strongly encourage youth leaders, especially youth leaders who have been impacted by exclusionary discipline practices and toxic or traumatic learning environments, to apply. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is a great group. This was a wonderful conference. I'm enjoying every minute of it. I'm Elizabeth Pruitt. I'm the policy analyst for ACES Connection Network, and that, of course, stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. When someone early in the conference asked, who knows about the ACE study, and practically every hand went up. That's so unusual, and it was so heartening to see that. We wanted to invite everybody in the room, if you're not already a member of ACES Connection, to join. We have recently restructured our ACES and Education group so that we can share more resources more efficiently. And so we'd like for you to join the overall network and also to join the ACES and Education group. So ACES Connection Network has two parts. One is ACES Too High, and this is a new site geared to the general public, people that are just interested in the topic overall, and they can learn about what people and organizations and systems and communities are doing to implement best practices that relate to ACES sciences. And then the companion network, which is really where a lot of the work gets done, is acesconnection.com. And we now have about 10,000 members. We started off with just a couple of hundred. Jane Stevens is the founder and co-editor. Many of you probably know Jane. It was her sort of inspiration, and she made it happen. Both of these sites are commercial free. It doesn't cost anything to join, and part of the reason for that is that we're generously supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the California Endowment, where a lot of the reporting is done. So ACES and Education Group within ACES, connection.com. We have about 300 mainly educators, and that's really the go-to place for anything that relates to trauma-informed schools. Resilience building and solutions-oriented is sort of how we see things. It's not all doom and gloom, and our focus really is on telling the stories about the movement. So if you join the group, you'll get information about webinars, toolkits, research, studies, books, anything that relates to this topic. So I invite you to join. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you to all three, Rebecca, Elizabeth, and Allison, and a special thanks to Allison with the Communities for Just School Fund for bringing in our girls this morning, which were definitely a very important part of today's discussion. So we are going to move into our state team deliverables and do-outs. So you should have the one person identified from your team who's going to come and step up. It's going to be 15 of you guys. If you guys just want to make a nice line over here, we'll pass this mic down, and we just want 60 seconds of what are the action items coming out. That's 1 minute each. Of what are the action items coming out of today's convening. And of course, we have a very special guest here listening before he gives remarks, our Secretary of Education, John King. So, Colorado come up, DC, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland, Minnesota, Michigan, Montana, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Oregon, Tennessee, and Virginia. And please just kick us off with your state and if you're representing a district, what district you're representing or what entity you're representing from your state.
Hi, I'm Brittany Miracle. I'm from the Ohio Department of Education. Ohio spoke a lot about really getting the message out statewide, and to do that, we have to help people understand the urgency of this issue and help them understand why girls of color need to be understood in a different way. And to do that, we are talking about cultural competency training and really letting districts know that it's okay to have implicit biases, but you have to be able to identify that you have them and how to get past that. During our state session, we broke it out into what ODE is going to be responsible for doing and what districts can do to move this message forward. ODE is interested in partnering with institutions of higher education so our teachers are prepared and they understand mental health issues and trauma before they get into the classroom so they can hit the ground running. We would also like to convene a group of stakeholders so statewide agencies can collaborate and partner and share some data so we can have a statewide message. And we would also like to review our existing structures to get all of this work integrated into one consistent plan, especially as we're working through the Every Student Succeeds Act. Our districts are looking into more sustainable family engagement, and that's mainly through partnerships with the community members so they can actually target resources that are necessary to get these kiddos focused. And lastly, districts have talked about reviewing their discipline policies and coming up with creative solutions to keep kids in school.
I'm thankful for my Montana team for joining me here. They exemplify compassion in their work every day. I think we're all going to talk a lot about similar planning. These things kind of need to scale up and roll out in similar fashions. One of the things I think that we talked about specifically for Montana is our need to bring in focus groups of girls of color, in particular, to really get their earnest and honest feedback about what sort of supports they need in their communities. Each community is very diverse ethnically and geographically in our state, and so we want to make sure that we're very specific and targeted. We're fortunate in Montana that we have a large, growing community that's becoming trauma-informed and invigorated about this work. So we would like to, find our partners, find our stakeholders, and a coalition, including tribes, schools, mental health entities, everybody and anybody, to fold this work into already existing and ongoing efforts, because this can't simply be another add-on to what we're already doing in schools. They need to see it as something that can become integrated into their existing work. And really, this isn't about tinkering around the edges. This is about reform. This is about thinking about a new way in which we work with schools, the way schools are structured, the way school calendars exist, the way school schedules exist, the ways we interact and work with parents and communities. It's about rethinking all of that on a much larger scale.
Ditto. I'm representing District of Columbia Public Schools, where we have been leading the nation in education reform. One of the ways we've done that is through the combination of trauma-informed practices and increasing our school mental health workforce from about 80 to 100 to about 300 now, so that we can actually increase access to school mental health services so that at least 10% of our population has a clinician available to serve them if they need it. We've also married the school mental health work with the school climate work because one cannot exist without the other. We have a transient population that moves between charter schools and public schools, and so one of the things we hope to do is to increase the district conversation around trauma-informed schools. We also intend to look at the model that we use for our military population, our students that are coming from military families who need that extra touch when they're going into a new building, going into a new state, and treating all of our students that are transitioning and moving from school to school with that same compassion. One of the other things we heard a lot about today that is a part of our developing comprehensive trauma-informed schools work is that of self-care. We have, battle fatigue, if you will, because our teachers are struggling, our principals are struggling, and so we want to incorporate that important part of trauma-informed practice to include the staff that support the students. And so those are just a few of the things that we plan to do in DC Public Schools.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Inés Nieves, and I'm from New York State, the great state of New York. Our discussion was quite lively and energetic, as you can see. And you all have heard the statement that they say, be the change. Well, we are the change. So we decided that the first thing we had to do was create an infrastructure. And this team that was invited to come here to DC, we're going to stay together. And we represent, you know, we start out in New York City all the way up to the western part of New York State. So we started talking about a meeting schedule and really what some strategies are for change in New York. And some of them will include really gender responsive training for our teachers, trauma training for teachers and staff. And not just, you know, just because you're trauma informed doesn't mean you're trauma responsive, right? So we want to make sure that when we train our folks that we also give them the tools and the strategies so that they can engage with the young people. Continuing our work with girls of color and LGBT youth as well, addressing issues of race and gender, harassment, bullying, and building a structure for transitional services, as we have a representative here for juvenile justice, so we won't forget them. Did I forget anything? All right, good. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here representing the great state of Maryland, and we are so fortunate to be joined here today by our colleagues from Baltimore City. So we had a very reflectful and engaging conversation today. We have a very diverse state. We have 24 LEAs, all different needs, but really there's a common theme across our state of mental health needs, especially for children of color. And our colleagues in Baltimore City really are kind of leading the way with that charge. They've just recently received a $2.3 million grant for promoting resilience. And they're coming up with an implementation plan of best practices and training for, 13 different schools across the district. And so we work in a very collaboratively with our systems. And so we're looking to learn from them just as they're looking to learn from us. At the state level, we are continuing to meet with our state level partners so that we can look at take a census really of what the resources are that are in our state, how effectively those resources are being delivered, and if they're really having an impact on the students they are being delivered to. And we're looking at how to collect those data and look at those data for effectiveness. We've also been the recipient of a, Now is the Time Project Aware grant. And to date, we've trained over 2,000 educators in youth mental health first aid. And so we feel this is a great step toward helping to educate teachers, staff, community, and families when it comes to the needs, especially of children of color. Like many states, we really struggle to keep a balance. We're a very high-performing state, and so we want our kids to do well academically, but we are really changing and really sort of turning the corner in terms of how we look at students with mental health services. So we were very pleased that 2 months ago, our State Board of Education really declared a focus on looking at students with mental health, and so now we can really freely allocate more resources toward that. Thanks.
Hi, I'm from New Jersey, and we sort of developed two goals. We have folks here from our state agency. We also have a representative from a district. So one of the main themes of what we discussed was how to weave this into work that we're already doing so that it's not just another thing, right, and avoid that sort of jumbled schoolhouse reform fatigue thing that we see so often. So in terms of our state goal, we talked about New Jersey is about to roll out a tiered system of support that will be part of our SS state plan. And so how can we build out a component of NJTSS that focuses specifically on this trauma-informed approach that we've heard so much about today that we know is so critically important, with a particular eye toward girls of color and their needs. So we're excited that the timing is good since we're doing some sort of stakeholder outreach for ESSA anyhow. We're hoping to convene some groups that can give us some insight as to their needs. So we also talked about the fact that As a state, we have a responsibility, we think, to sort of synthesize the information that we gather, put it into a format that is easily digestible for districts that we roll it out to, and be really mindful about how we roll out resources that we develop, and not just have it be sort of a mass email that could be easily missed. We're also going to reach out to other agencies and institutions across the state and determine what work they're already doing that we may be able to support and mutually support one another. Center for Supportive Schools comes to mind. You know, there are a bunch of others out there. So our next steps are to go back and share this information internally. We actually have an NJTSS leadership meeting tomorrow, so we are going to start tomorrow in sharing this out. And then the district goal that our superintendent who joined us came up with was that she has a component of her district strategic plan that this fits into quite nicely. And so she's going to make sure that this is, you know, deliberately discussed with her staff, followed up through walkthroughs and other mechanisms, and not sort of lost in the shuffle. So kind of, you know, striking that balance between not having it be yet another thing, but also emphasizing the importance.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Anderson Foley, and I'm from the Illinois State Board of Education. And we have taken the opportunity through ESSA to really reflect and look at the whole child. Our state's goals are very supportive of that, safe and healthy schools. Within the capacity of ESSA, we have built out some of the elements of a system-wide system of support. Within that, then nested is a multi-tiered system of support. And really looking at it, again, through the lens of the whole child. And what are those non-academic skills, if you will, that will lead to the outcomes that we want. It's not just about the academic outcome, but it's the outcomes that we talked about today. So we've had a second round of interacting with our stakeholders, gathering their feedback. As our writing team for MTSS, which kicked off on Friday, they are also going to be holding some focus groups. This will be a part of that, so we can bring a full educational system to our students. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Palmero. I'm representing the Pennsylvania-based team, which is sitting over there, so hello to my colleagues. And I'm really pleased to say that we had multiple stakeholders from the Commonwealth here with us today, and we were pleased to be able to be part of this whole collective of people. The learning that we grew to come to appreciate today was really enhanced by the conversations and stories that started with the Youth Voice this morning and went all the way through the day. So we thank you for this opportunity. As we reflect on what our walk-away considerations are, I can't help but frame it from the perspective of promotion, prevention, intervention. What are we going to do to promote these key concepts and considerations that we must keep in front of ourselves as we set our goals around ensuring equity for all, and in particular focusing on issues around trauma-responsive approaches to supporting all children, including youth and girls of color. One of the things that we are very committed to is continuing our work that we've already begun with regard to considering the implications associated with the work that we're doing within the Commonwealth around preparing ourselves for the implementation of ESSA. One of the other things that we think is very important from a large state level perspective is the advancement of our Secretary's commitment to community-based schools and looking at how community resource and assets at the state and regional level are critical in terms of providing the kinds of supports that are necessary in order to provide opportunities and to reduce these issues that we see are so often complicating matters with regard to supporting students struggling with trauma. We believe that professional development tools and a continuum of tools and resources are absolutely necessary, not only for in-service teachers, but for pre-service teachers. At the state level, we spend a great deal of time talking about what we can do with our partnering institutes of higher education, who are those pre-service teacher training institutes, in preparing the new generation of educators to understand the implications of this kind of work so that we have good teachers entering the profession every bit as much as growing the good teachers that we already have practicing in our Commonwealth schools. One of the things that we also recognize at the state level is that we have a lot of assets in play that do align with supporting and advancing this work, whether it's our statewide implementation of PBIS, Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, and the work that we're trying to do through PBIS with regard to teaching people about vulnerable decision-making points and how to respond appropriately in the context of the classroom or school settings, every bit as much as our relationship with our county partners and human service agencies and our community-based resources that are all around us. And so we have a lot of consideration to do and a lot of work to be done with regard to aligning our assets to making sure that we are working smarter, not necessarily harder, in aligning our efforts and taking lessons from our LEAs. And two of them were here today, and I'd like to announce them by name, the School District of Lancaster and the School District of Philadelphia, who are every bit as much teaching us at the state level what we need to do to best support them and their efforts. So it's with that I'd like to turn this over to you.
To the great state of Oregon. So my name is Joyce Harris. I'm with Education Northwest. I'm a former director of the Region 10 Equity Assistance Center for 21 years. And we have a unique team. I have a judge here. I have someone from the Oregon Department of Education, and we also have a county commissioner. And so our whole approach is to look at collectively what we need to do in our state to ensure that our young women are achieving to the highest potential. We need to focus on everything other people are not focused on across all of our systems. We need to teach accurate historical knowledge of students of color and examine where we were, where we are now, and what we're doing now and where we want to go. That's what we want to do. We want to convene a panel of experts, and this would include researchers, college professors, and in our world, our community members are experts. Our girls are experts. And we need to change the culture, not only in our schools, but in our communities and in all of the systems that impact what goes on in schools, starting with early childhood through post-secondary. We plan to use evidence, practice as compasses to help direct state policy on the need for culturally and trauma-informed interventions and services, once again, across all of our systems. We plan to do listening sessions and focus groups with our young women, and even with the younger ones. You know, it's not just the teenagers. The little ones have something to teach us, too. We want to do an assessment and needs sensing. We want to talk to people. We don't want this to be an effort where you do something to fix the community, but you do it in partnership with the community. And so we want to bring the faith community in, our law enforcement, culturally responsive social service organizations, the Deltas, other social groups, the Black Studies programs in our universities, the teacher ed programs, and we're going to give a special invitation to our governor. We want her at the table with us, and other legislators. And based on my experience as an EAC director, I want our community to know the resources that are available from the U.S. Department of Education, the Office for Civil Rights, as well as the U.S. Department of Justice, because that's where I found a lot of the work that I was able to do with schools and districts came from those sources. So that is the great state of Oregon. Thank you.
Great. I'm representing the Colorado team in Denver Public Schools, and we're going to move from really tactical to longer term. So the first thing that we're going to do that we want to have completed by next month is really thinking about how to incorporate ACEs into our expulsion process, knowing that our girls of color are disproportionately expelled, even as we close our gaps, to really think both about information for our hearing officers, but also ensuring we leave those students with the proper supports that they really need to be successful. Then, thinking both about Denver and across the state, we really want to think about the alignment of our school-based health centers and the use of ACEs and overall understanding of trauma and those services that are being offered. It's something that we really feel can expand statewide very nicely. We want to really think about Title IX, its connection with our comprehensive health education focus, and really looking at schools where we have over-reporting, under-reporting, and really having the important conversations about what's happening to our girls in our schools. And then we want to really make sure that as we move this work forward, we don't just take the easy way out and implement a bunch of universal supports, but that we really keep the spotlight, as it was today, on our girls of color. And with that frame in mind, we're going to think about all of the networks that we already have statewide and how we really raise this message up and even hopefully move towards a statewide convening at some point in the future.
Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Bird. I am here representing our district from Massachusetts. I'm here from Reading, Mass. But I also have the pleasure of being able to serve on our statewide Safe and Supportive Schools Commission. So in Massachusetts, we are really blessed to have a lot of the policy at the state level in place to clear the way for districts. We have some laws that have been placed for the past few years that are going to help us really focus on our discipline, rethinking discipline. Our Chapter 222 has really reframed how a lot of our districts are approaching that. Additionally, we have a law that's all about building safe and supportive schools and requiring that every district has a safe and supportive school plan, district-wide and then building-wide, which is tremendous because then it allows our superintendents and principals to be able to do the work. So at our state level, we really want to increase the emphasis on this topic. We've historically been very focused on the academics, even with building our multi-tiered system of support, which I've heard many of my colleagues speak about. It's been really surely focused on the RTI side of things, looking at the academics. And how do we interweave the PBIS, but also that overarching piece of how do you look at the embedding of all of them together. We've been lucky enough in Reading to have one of the school climate transformation grants as well as the Project Aware, so we're using the next 3 years that we have remaining to leverage that locally. And then how do we build capacity at our state level? We have 3 communities of practice in the state that have this time to focus on that as a priority. How can we inform at the state level so we can help build communities of practice regionally and make sure that people have peers that they can, in education, it's beg, borrow, and steal from those who do the work already. So how can we do that for our colleagues? Similarly, we're really lucky to have the Safe and Supportive Schools Commission has put a framework together and a self-assessment tool for schools. And it's all publicly available and free for them all. And it was really started by Harvard Law's Trauma and Learning and Policy Initiative. Susan Cole was here speaking in a couple of the breakout sessions from that. So when we're thinking about infusing trauma into things, it's nice in Massachusetts, it's kind of done the other way around, that the trauma work really informed our Safe and Supportive Schools framework. So how do we get back to our roots? I think we take that for granted, and I think we try to use this generic safe and supportive schools, and we often lose the trauma-informed side of things. So how do we continue to bring the attention back to that? And my last other thought is we have Lesley University brings the education to the educators. So instead of requiring educators who've gone through their education prep programs and haven't gotten any information on this, they've actually put professors all over the state to bring helping traumatized children to learn 4-part certificate programs to our educators. So how do we continue to expand that program and share that with other states and share that with other communities so that everyone can have the same information and sense of urgency?
It's okay to clap. Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia Mobley, and I'm here representing the great state of Minnesota. I got a little clap. New York, you guys kind of took the room here. But I'm excited to tell you about the work that we're going to be doing in collaboration. I'm here also representing St. Paul Public Schools. I'm the interim special education director, and so one of the things I want to share is the work that we're doing with trauma-informed schools does not exclude our scholars with disabilities, nor does it exclude our multilingual learners as well. So one thing I wanted to share, first and foremost, I want to thank the school social workers who helped us launch and continue to, I think we need to just give it up for the folks who are on the ground every day doing the work. And so in St. Paul, it's the school social workers, and we've been leading the work for 4 years doing trauma-informed schools to increase the knowledge of what trauma-informed schools are and what they are not, most importantly as well. And teachers simply just want to know, what do I do? And so having the space to have that conversation and providing the tools is something that we're doing now. Continuing to work cross-departmentally as well. This work has to be sustainable, and there has to be continuity in the work. There's no one group who can do this alone. And so we're doing that in our state, and more specifically in St. Paul, by isolating race in these conversations. Race a lot of times gets left out of the conversation, and so when you bring in race, you bring in a part of the discussion that has led to some of the disparities that we see. In addition to that, we're also making sure we're specifically talking about our girls. our girls, our scholars, our girls. So for next steps. So we're going to continue to engage our district leadership, building that sustainability and continuity. Also engage our scholars, and most of you guys have said, guys and girls and ladies have said, making sure that our scholars' voices and narratives are at the table is how this work is going to be sustainable. I'm going to say that one more time. Making sure that our scholars' voices are at the table and our girls is going to make the work sustainable. So in St. Paul, we've already trained almost 3,000 teachers as part of our induction and coming back to school for our new teachers and our old teachers. All teachers were required to go through a module informing them of the basic principles of trauma-informed schools. 2,600 teachers. If you want to learn more, let me know. As of October the 1st, we will have 9 30-minute sessions on everything including self-care to historical trauma. And we're also not excluding our paraprofessionals, our bus drivers, folks who make sure that our scholars are safe and welcomed every single day. So how do we do this? We move from being reactive to proactive. And so one of the things that we're doing is similar to what one of my colleagues said, is we're gonna do the same thing for our state. So we're taking your idea, we're moving it to the state of Minnesota. And eventually, our goal is to have this meeting in Minnesota in the summer. So for our State Department, offering ACES training and education on what that is and making sure that's available for all. Also continuing to work interdisciplinary, working with our interdisciplinary teams for collaborative trainings. How can we work together as a state? In addition, I don't know how many of folks in the room met before you came here, but we're gonna continue this when we leave the White House, of course. And that's how to make the work more sustainable. Most importantly, we're thinking about doing a youth summit and making sure that our work does not exclude, once again, our scholars, and also does not include our scholars with disabilities and our emergent bilingual scholars as well. So we're excited, and we are also bringing together all the folks in Minnesota to say, hey, we're gonna lead the nation. We lead the nation in so many things in the state of Minnesota, and when we disaggregate, guess what? For our folks of color, not so much. Not so much, and so we're gonna continue the work.
I'm Pat Connor. I am the Director of Safe and Supportive Schools for the Tennessee Department of Education, the great state of Tennessee. And it really struck me listening to all of you folks. We do not do enough at the state level to support our districts in this work at all. And so one takeaway that we have moving forward in 2 weeks, and Jim will be there as one of our keynote speakers, we have our first ever statewide conference on trauma-informed schools and to create compassionate schools. Where we do not have any training as of yet for our teachers on trauma, and so I have the information about trauma. Now what? How do I apply that in my classroom? What do I do? What are the tools? What are the resources? So that's in progress. We have not looked at our discipline, our student code of conduct at the state level for several years, and we are in the process of doing that as well. We haven't really examined our chronic absenteeism rate, but we're doing that now. So we've got a lot of positive things that are going at the state level that will take time and resources and a lot of manpower. When I say those, I get really overwhelmed. But you have to start somewhere in this. Our Commissioner of Education, Candace McQueen, her strategic goal has one section, goals. One section is all means all. It's girls of color, boys of color, people who are orange, red, purple. Every student in Tennessee will receive and be treated the same way. But we are not, as you said, looking at girls of color and exactly what are we doing to them and not with them. We do have student advisory councils that we meet across the state, and one takeaway I have from today is we are not meeting with girls of color in these student advisory councils, and we have got to do that. So I think our districts, Memphis and Nashville, are some really bright spots in our state, are doing some really great work around trauma. and around those disparities, discipline disparities. But again, I think it comes from the top down. It needs to come from the state and work down. We've got to support our teachers and our districts. We have 144 districts. 88% have 10,000 or less students in them. Very rural state. So how do you reach those rural pockets? And that's our challenge. But you know what? We've got a positive attitude. We've got hardworking people who love students and care about kids, and we can do it.
And we're the only goldies, aren't we? We are. Pat and I have known each other for a long time. I'm from the wonderful state of Virginia, just around the corner here, and I bring with me two individuals that I work real closely with at the State Department. I'm the Director of Student Services, and I have three awesome school division leaders here. Richmond City Schools, Petersburg City Schools, and Norfolk City Schools. Let's give those schools a round of applause. They work really hard, and the reason they came here was because of their hard work. At the State Department of Education, I've been in my position a little over a year and a half now, and we've really done taking it to the tipping point, and we're about to go there. 3 years ago, we got a school climate transformation grant and Project Aware, and we opened up a center at one of our universities called the Virginia Tiered Center of Supports, Research, and Implementation Center. And what we've been doing there is not talking about necessarily all topical issues, but how do we transform the way we do work? And it's really about building systems and building capacity so that as issues come up and so that we can address the things that are in our data. It's all about data-driven, it's all about the tiered systems, but we've integrated the whole behavior thing, we've looked at social emotional, we've had lots of professional development, and we have developed coaches for our state. So we have about 50 coaches that we've trained that go through a training, and part of their job for 3 years is to work with a school division. We have 132 school divisions to help them transform the way they do work and the way they look at their data. And that data means disproportionality, looking at girls of color, looking at academics, because what we don't want to do is to put another thing on their plate, because they'll shoot us, and then we'll have a lot of problem in Virginia. So how do we empower our local school divisions to use that information to build the capacity that they need in their division with their communities? A big part of what we're doing is looking at how to reach out to the community. Who are your community partners that you need to be working with, and what are those efforts, and how can you do those wraparound services? And how do we, most of all, take care of our staff? You know, children, I love them to death, but they're going to go through the system. Our staff is going to be there forever. How do we take care of the staff to bring back to them the love of being able to teach? So it's not just about academics and not just about testing, but that whole human, social, emotional piece of being a teacher and bringing that piece back to what we're about. Dr. Bedden from Richmond really kindly said, remember, we have been focused for several years on academics and just testing, and we've gotten to be like little robots. And we've gotten away from that social emotional piece of connecting as human beings. And before we can teach, before we can learn, we've got to do that connection. So when we get back to the state, we're going to incorporate what we have learned today, bring our 3 leaders from our school divisions together. They're all doing little pilots, and see how that goes and how we can create that through our systems of care kind of process and our VTS systems framework to take that throughout our state. I'm really proud of where Virginia is. We fought hard to get where we are today. And so thank you, and thank you for all the people from Virginia.
Thank you. My name is Terrence Wheeler, representing River Rouge School District, but also the great state of Michigan. Go Blue. We also represent Flint. So I would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the Flint crisis. It's unlike anybody in here in terms of a health care and a water crisis. that pain is going to be generational. We don't know the effects of that outcome in terms of the water poisoning. Also, from the state level, we're looking to address the truancy and have flexibility in our zero tolerance, create trauma-informed schools and approaches that work with our existing systems, deepen our partnerships with healthcare and mental health systems to collect data on ACEs. We also realize that it's not the conditions of our young people, but the decision-making of adults that determine their destiny. Their success is predicated on our participation. We got to do all that we can for as many as we can. And Mr. King, we invite you to River Rouge School District and walk the halls to meet and greet our young people. All lives can't matter until Black girls matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to each of our states. And I hope that with the work that Georgetown plans to do moving forward, that we can hold each other accountable for the commitments made today. There is no better way to close out the conversations, collaboration, and commitments that have taken place here today than with our last speaker, a former Massachusetts teacher and school leader, and former Commissioner of Education from the great state of New York. A product himself of New York City schools, this individual has had to think about school discipline on the classroom level, the school level, state level, and now at the national level as our nation's Secretary of Education. Not to mention, perhaps most importantly, as a father of 2 school-age girls himself in the home level as well. Please welcome to the stage a leader who is committed to ensuring excellence and equity for all students, our Secretary of Education, John King.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I come to this conversation both from the experience of an educator focused on our kids who are most at risk and trying to support their success, as a parent of 2 girls, but also as a child who experienced trauma and whose life was saved by school. My mom passed away when I was 8, October of my 4th grade year. I lived, after my mom passed, with my dad, who was quite sick with undiagnosed Alzheimer's. And lived with my dad till as he got more and more sick. He passed away when I was 12. I moved around after that between family members and schools, but at the end of the day, what saved my life, the reason I'm standing here today, the reason I'm alive today, is the work of New York City public school teachers who saved my life. What they did for me was they could have looked at me and said, here's an African-American, Latino male student, family in crisis, going to New York City public school, and they could have assumed that I couldn't possibly be successful. They could have given up on me. But instead, they didn't, and they made school a place that was safe and supportive and nurturing and engaging and interesting and challenging and compelling every day. We read the New York Times in 4th grade. We did productions of Midsummer Night's Dream and Alice in Wonderland in elementary school. I had teachers who, when I finished a book, they were there with the next. When I finished a math problem, they were there with the next one that was a little bit more challenging. And teachers who made school a place where I could be a kid when I couldn't be a kid outside of school. I can remember I had a teacher, Miss D, my 7th grade social studies teacher. And I had the chance when I was Commissioner of Education in New York to go back to my Mark Twain Junior High School classroom with Miss D, who was still there teaching middle school social studies. I walked into Miss D's classroom. In 7th grade was when my father was most sick, and I worried every day. I would sit in class and I would wonder if he was okay and what had happened at home, and I didn't know why he was sick, and I didn't know why life at home was so unpredictable. And that was during that period that my father once woke me up 2 in the morning, tell me it was time to go to school, and I didn't know why. And I remember hanging onto the banister in the house saying, Daddy, no, it's not time to go to school, it's not time to go to school, and not understanding what was wrong. But in Miss D's class, I was focused on what Miss D was trying to teach and what we were trying to do in 7th grade social studies. I came to her class, walked into her classroom on the day that I was visiting, and she said, oh, I want to show you something. And she went to the back of the classroom and she climbed up, in New York City Public Schools, big closets and a lot of old classrooms. She climbed up on top and she started rifling through papers, and she pulled out the project from 7th grade social studies. The project where I was so focused on being the best Aztec newscaster, the best Aztec sportscaster there had ever been, that I was able to really be a kid and be a learner in her classroom. And she'd saved that project, and she did not know then the difference that project, that experience was making in my life. And so today's conversation is about policy. It is about our Every Student Succeeds Act implementation plans. It is about how we support professional development for new educators and current educators. But ultimately, it is about how we create school environments that save kids' lives, how we create community environments that save kids' lives. And this isn't about the heroic act of a single individual. It can't be. Right, we have to create systems of support for our kids. And so this conversation, I want to just take a few minutes to review the importance of today's conversation, because it is about all of us leaving here and asking, what can we do to strengthen our systems of support around our young people? You've talked today about the notion of adverse childhood experiences, what those mean in young people's lives, the effect of trauma on young people's lives. And we have to remember that every day, educators and mentors and school counselors and bus drivers and the school secretary, they are experiencing with kids the effects of those adverse childhood experiences on those children and the results of the experiences that they've had. And they may not know. I often say to folks, I'm the first Secretary of Education to have been kicked out of high school, but I hope not the last. Right? And I was kicked out of high school because even despite all the investment that teachers made in me, all the hope that they gave me when I was a teenager, I was still mad. Mad about things I'd experienced, confused about my relationship with adults, and I acted out and rebelled against adult authority. So when we think about what trauma means, what trauma-informed education means, it means all of us as adults understanding the impact that those traumatic experiences are having on young people and understanding their actions in that context. And if people had not given me a second chance, I wouldn't be here today either. Right? So it's not so simple as invest in children a sense of hope. It's how do you sustain that even when they push against it for reasons they may not themselves understand. And so this work is about how we build those systems that create those meaningful second chances for young people, the kinds of second chances that saved my life. Now, you've talked today about what it looks like to do trauma-informed care as a community, how we have to bring together schools and community-based organizations to address students' need. I think Dr. Burke Harris referred to it as the need for a movement around this work on students' behalf. Well, so we've got to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a movement? Right? And part of what it means to be a movement is we have to think beyond our silos, beyond just our functions, beyond just our institutional loyalties. We have to ask, how do we connect across the intersectionality of challenges that our students face? How do we connect across education and healthcare and housing and transportation? How do we connect mental health service providers with schools in an ongoing partnership? Right? Not just refer out, but ensure that there's a continuing partnership in support of our children. And we focus particularly on the challenges facing our young women of color because we know how significant the obstacles are in too many schools. I'm sure today you talked about our civil rights data collection survey data that shows we have 1.6 million kids who go to a school that has a sworn law enforcement officer and no school counselor. And those are disproportionately students of color, low-income students. That is young women of color in schools who have no one to go to for support, but see that sworn law enforcement officer every day at the door. Right, we know that also from that same civil rights data collection, we know that African American girls represent 20% of the girls in preschool, but 54% of the girls who are suspended from preschool. 4-year-olds suspended from preschool. Disproportionately young women of color, and we've got to confront that. We've got to ask, what are the systemic interventions that will change that reality? We know that 6% of the kids in K-12 experience out-of-school suspension, but that for African American girls, that's 10%, and for white girls, it's 2%. And we've got to confront that. We've got to confront those challenging issues around race and around class and the impact that they have on our young people. You've talked today about the sexual abuse to prison pipeline. That's a conversation some folks are uncomfortable having, but we've got to have it for the sake of our kids. And you've talked today about the power of trauma-informed schools, but acknowledge that there are still only a few hundred schools that are deeply engaged in that practice. We have a lot of work to do. So I'm grateful to the folks who are in this room, grateful to the Council on Women and Girls for organizing us and the staff at the White House, grateful to our colleagues at the Justice Department for their partnership in this work, grateful to the Georgetown Law Center on Poverty and Inequality for being a partner in this work, grateful to our many speakers today, grateful to the AFT and the NEA for their partnership in supporting teachers around this work. Grateful to my colleague Kathleen Lehman and our team at the Office of Civil Rights who are fighting every day to ensure that districts and states fulfill their responsibilities to our young people. And grateful to all of you for gathering for this important conversation. And I want to flag, and it was powerful to hear the accounts of what you are committed to do. And I hope in the moments as you were listening to other states and districts, you were also thinking about, oh yeah, that's something they came up with that we didn't have on our list. We're going to add it to our list. And I want to reference some of the resources and tools I hope that you will take advantage of. And some of them you've heard about today, and so some of this may be reinforcement, but I want to make sure that you make use of these tools. One of those is our Healthy Students Promising Futures Toolkit, which is about how we connect schools and health. And one of the realities is schools are today leaving money on the table that could support school-based healthcare services. I know folks from Pennsylvania talked about community schools. Well, you don't have to wait for a Promise Neighborhoods grant or some other kind of federal grant to create community schools. There are community school resources that can be taken advantage of under the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid today. And so what that toolkit talks about are two things. One, how you can get reimbursement for school-based provision of health services, including mental health services. Also talks about the importance of using the enrollment process and other administrative interactions of schools with families to make sure that families are enrolled in health insurance. Even though low-income families are guaranteed access to health insurance through the Medicaid program, we know that there are children who are not receiving regular health care. And we've engaged in a partnership with the Children's Defense Fund and the National Superintendents Association just to say we need to take that step at the beginning of the school year to make sure we simply ask families the question, is everyone enrolled in health insurance? Right, making sure that folks are taking advantage of those health insurance dollars. There are school improvement grant dollars and school climate transformation grant dollars that you've heard about today. As states think about their implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act, there's an opportunity to think about how they better leverage school improvement dollars in support of this work. How they may leverage those dollars to support school-based mental health services, leverage those dollars to hire school counselors, leverage those dollars to provide training to school staff. There are the SERVE grants that you heard about, our school emergency response to violence grants that are specifically targeted to school communities that have experienced significant trauma. And there are lessons learned from those grantees that can be shared. There's our work on rethinking discipline that is part of the work of the Council on Women and Girls and also part of the work of the President's My Brother's Keeper initiative. But through the Rethink Discipline effort, we've organized regional convenings to share best practices, and I hope you will take advantage of some of the resources developed there to help schools find alternatives to exclusionary discipline. And as we do that, we have to remember it's not just about the policy change, it is about culture change. It's not just about saying don't suspend, it's about helping support teachers and principals with the practices that will allow them to create safe and supportive communities instead of using suspension and expulsion. We recently put out a joint policy statement with our other federal partners around the importance of eliminating exclusionary discipline practices in early childhood. I hope you will use that as a resource. We also just recently put out guidance on the role of school resource officers to reinforce for all school communities that discipline should be done by educators, not by police in schools. Discipline should be done by trained educators, not by police in schools. There may be that's right. There may be ways to proactively engage police officers as mentors and participants in the school community, but it is not as the folks responsible for day-to-day discipline of students. And we put out that guidance to support that. We also put out companion guidance to higher ed institutions about the importance of campus police receiving the same kinds of training and best practice that the Task Force on 21st Century Policing recommended for police departments. Because in too many campuses, the campus police are sending the message to students that this is not a place for them. And so changing practice of campus police is also critical. We have resources, and Catherine described the Safe Place to Learn resources that we released today, but resources around enforcement of Title IX, around strategies to combat sexual violence and sexual assault. We have our project on chronic absenteeism, Every Student, Every Day. We've got 30 communities around the country that are engaging thousands of mentors to help tens of thousands of students get to school. And the challenge of chronic absenteeism is a huge one. Even the best teacher can succeed with a kid who's not in class. And so the question becomes, how do we get at the root causes that are getting in the way and support students in getting to school? And so I hope you will take advantage of those resources and join that effort. We talked today, several of the states talked about the role of the Every Student Succeeds Act conversation. There is a tremendous opportunity in the new law to focus on a broadening of the definition of educational excellence. Yes, we know students need English. Yes, we know they need math skills. Those are foundational, but they are necessary, not sufficient for success. Students also need science and social studies and art and music and opportunities for socio-emotional learning, and states can stand up for that broader vision through the Every Student Succeeds Act process. But it won't happen if you're not at the table. And so one of the things to think about with your teams that are here, whose voice is in those Every Student Succeeds Act implementation conversations? How are you helping to shape the implementation of the law? The law also creates important flexibility around the interventions in struggling schools. A struggling school could take advantage of the resources of our PBIS Technical Assistance Center. A struggling school could use federal school improvement dollars to create a community school with extended day programs and healthcare programs and dental services. But that won't happen unless you are actively engaged in those state level conversations. Ultimately, what we've been talking about today is a public health crisis that we can solve together through systemic strategies that support our students. And you heard about examples of best practice. You heard about schools that, because of their trauma-informed approach, are seeing gains in graduation rates and academic outcomes. This is solvable. We can do better by our students, but we have to do it together, and we have to do it in a way that cuts through some of the bureaucratic obstacles that sometimes get in the way. So I want to close with this. So I'm joined here by my wife, who came, and she came today because she has spent her career researching these very issues, but began as a first grade teacher in Harlem, realizing that she was underprepared by her teacher preparation program, which was very good, by the way, to confront the challenges of the trauma her students had experienced. And she'll describe the story of a student who would hide when something got difficult in the classroom, and then coming to understand that the reason he would hide was because he had witnessed his parents, is it one of his parents? Both of his parents? Both of his parents being killed. And so his reaction to stress in the classroom was to go hide. But as a new first grade teacher, she didn't necessarily know that that was why he was doing that, nor have great strategies for how to respond to that situation. And so she ended up getting a doctorate in human development psychology to try to better understand how to address that very challenge. But our systemic challenge is we know there are boys like that young man in classrooms all across the country. We know there are girls in classrooms all across the country who have been victims of abuse. We know there are boys and girls in classrooms all across the country who are dealing with their parents' substance abuse, with domestic violence in the home, who've lost a parent or both parents, children who are homeless, children who move between foster care families, children who have a parent or parents who've been incarcerated. We know those children are in our classrooms, and yet we are not doing enough to equip new teachers or current teachers with the tools they need to support them. Shame on us as the adults if we don't take that on. So our collective challenge is to make it different tomorrow, make it different next month, make it different next year. And the President has charged us to do as much as we can to support you every moment, all the way through January 20th, and we intend and we intend to do exactly that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Have safe travels home and onward with the work ahead.